Kitco News special coverage of the AIBC Summit is brought to you by Coin Payments. Crypto payments made easy.
We have the pleasure now of speaking with W. Scott Stornetta. He is one of the founding fathers of blockchain, having laid the foundations of blockchain technology with his partner at the time, Mr. Haber, and we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about his work in the space over the last few decades, his influence in the blockchain and AI spaces, and where he sees the blockchain technologies heading next. Scott, it's an honor to have you on Kitco. Welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here.
Your article that you wrote 30 years ago, as of today, had a timestamp, a digital document, was influential, or monumentally influential, should I say, in the development of blockchain. And indeed, you were cited multiple times in the original blockchain white paper. I'm just going to cut to the chase because that's what everyone is colloquially thinking. Are you Satoshi?
Well, I get that question a lot.
I know.
And part of it is just that, I'd worked in this space for quite some time and then sort of drifted away from it to pursue other endeavors. And then I started getting unsolicited mail, postal mail, as well as email, saying people had read the Bitcoin white paper and saw that Stuart and I were the most cited. They also Googled me and saw that I did speak Japanese, that I had lived in Japan before. And so they were just asking me to put two and two together. And I guess my answer is always the same when someone asks that. I try to state it as clearly as I can. Namely, 私は Satoshi Nakamoto ではありません。でも Satoshi だったらそれを告白すると思いますか? I don't know how to say it any more clearly than that.
Okay, for those of us who don't speak Japanese watching this show, what did you just say, Scott?
I said, well, I'm certainly not Satoshi Nakamoto, but if I was, do you think I'd confess it?
Certainly there might be financial advantages to that, but I respect your integrity to your cause. Now your cause is to, we'll talk about many of your works right now in your current projects, but I want to talk about your paper that you wrote 30 years ago entitled How to Timestamp a Digital Document. Give us a summary of the importance of timestamping digital tokens and coins and what that means and how that translates to blockchain technology.
Sure. So the title is a little bit of a misnomer. What we were really concerned about was, given the fact that the world was moving to all digital records, there's a need to guarantee the integrity of those records in a way that everyone can trust and believe in the records. Because up until that time, the reason that people would trust records was because of evidence of tampering being obvious if you were to alter the record. And so we needed to elevate the issues so that we could make the digital data itself inherently trustworthy. And the solution to that was what led to the linked chain of blocks whose evidence is widely distributed so that you create a kind of decentralized trust network. And that really was, from my perspective, the breakthrough idea that underlies not only Bitcoin, but Ethereum and all of the other world's blockchains. Obviously, the difficulty with that is that people have added so much additional value on top of our original set of papers and the original service that we began to operate, that blockchain has come to mean something larger than just that. And so we certainly aren't trying to take any credit for the wonderful innovations that have been built on top of our original work, and are just delighted to be part of a very rapidly growing space.
Now, back then, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the timestamping mechanism you were writing about didn't refer to a chain, right?
Actually, that's not correct. It was a chain from the get-go.
It was, okay.
Although there are two interlocking mechanisms that are proposed in the original paper. One, the sequence of linked records, but the other one aimed at efficiency because we have substantial scaling issues that occur with that simple interpretation. And so the other way of creating randomized witnesses that were under no one's control is something, in fact, that you see sort of rediscovered in the Algorand layer 1 protocol, as well as other systems that have kind of come back to that idea.
When you wrote the paper at the time, was there enough or sufficient computing power to create something that we now know as cryptocurrencies today?
There certainly was adequate compute power in individual settings. What's so different today, though, is that you can have any individual have the necessary compute power, the necessary bandwidth, the necessary amounts of storage that are required, whereas back then it would have just been a few concentrated enterprise partners that would be capable of that.
Well, given that I've stated you are not Satoshi, the person or entity or organization that is Satoshi wrote the white paper and referenced your work several times in relation to timestamping and created what we now know as Bitcoin. In its purest form, Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer cashless system. When you first read that paper, what was your initial impression of this concept? And how did you feel being referenced?
Well, we were glad to be referenced because they were clearly using that foundational work. We were glad that it was useful for the creator. We often say that no one seems to know who Satoshi is, but we respond by saying, but he certainly knows who we are. And I think my response was that it was a kind of brilliant piece of sort of work of art, okay? But I felt that all along that the proof of work use of incentives was certainly incentives on steroids, but it wasn't clear to me that over the long term it would remain the most adopted solution. The original work that we proposed, if you read through the series of papers, not just the original paper, really relies on a kind of proof of reputation and the fact that different players have disparate motives, disparate incentives, and so the difficulty of trying to align everyone's incentives in a conspiratorial way was demonstrably, all but impossible.
Why was it necessary, you thought, and you and your coworkers at the time felt, that cashless systems of money had to be based on immutable code?
Well, again, I want to clarify again that my hat goes off to Satoshi, but in a sense, these are not cash systems. They are, in a sense, the opposite of it, in that they are fully traceable. Okay, part of what Satoshi was hoping to achieve through the use of pseudonyms was an effort in the direction of what cash is, or one of the features that it represents, namely the fact that it's not traceable. Bitcoin is a highly traceable system. In fact, that's at its core. And so, again, we feel like Bitcoin has been a very positive step forward, but it's in no sense the end game of what people are trying to achieve in creating a frictionless currency. And so we view Bitcoin as kind of the first inning of the game, rather than feeling that Bitcoin is the tablets come down from Mount Sinai.
The original Bitcoin white paper had a very simple mission that was stated in the abstract, and I'll just read one of the paragraphs here. It's meant to be a purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash that would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another. It's a pretty simple mission statement. Now people are talking about using Bitcoin as a global reserve monetary system. Countries have adopted Bitcoin as their de facto currency, as legal tender. And now people have been talking about Bitcoin as a universal store of value, and perhaps a return to a gold standard using Bitcoin, known as the Bitcoin standard. So it's certainly progressed and evolved. Absolutely. From a quote-unquote peer-to-peer version of electronic cash. How do you feel about this involvement?
Well, again, I'm happy to celebrate all that's been accomplished with it.
Okay.
But if you measure it against its own aspirational standard, okay, namely to function in a peer-to-peer way, to function as cash, including the anonymity that cash implies, and to become a leading medium of exchange, I think we have to give credit for what it's accomplished, but also we don't need to worship, that Bitcoin was the right thing from the beginning and never will be improved upon, because we talk about money in three ways in a classical economic sense: a medium of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value. I really think we see the limitations of Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. Okay?
Yes.
It's clearly not achieved the trajectory it had hoped for. Okay? And so, setting aside unit of account issue for a moment, in a sense, it's a retreat to discuss its purpose as a store of value. A retreat from its highest aspirational goal.
Do you feel like maybe the hash-based proof of work, which was designed to, I guess, protect the integrity of the ledger, has also made it inefficient, so to speak?
Yes, I do. And again, I feel that I need to preface each statement that I make in this area with, even if it's repetitive, with saying that it got across the goal line. It achieved what had never been achieved before. So, hats off to all of that.
Sure.
But if we're looking at this long-term evolution of blockchain-based technology, it's really the disparate interests amongst the players that generates the ultimate trust and integrity in the system. In a sense, the whole 51% narrative, I think, has sidetracked what's really possible in terms of a much higher standard of integrity than something just subject to 51% attacks. And obviously, this is not the forum for me to lay out that whole thesis. But let me just say that I think the blockchain still has the potential to go well beyond this concern about the 51% proof of work attack.
Okay. What's next for the development of blockchain? That was one of your presentations, I believe, here at the conference in Malta.
Well, for one thing, we see as very significant, in my opinion, the move by Ethereum over to proof of stake. Okay, proof of stake comes, again, from just my perspective, much closer to the original ideal that we had, a kind of proof of reputation. And it's obviously much less energy intensive. I think in a fundamental sense, it can provide the same level of integrity, though, again, for us, making all the integrity reside internal to the system rather than reach out and securing other assets, other off-chain assets, is, I think, a flaw of the existing system, not a feature. But setting all that aside as technological foundation, I think the growth into new areas of work is probably the most exciting thing that we see with respect to blockchain. And by that, I'm referring to issues like NFTs, the metaverse, and that core notion of being able to move specific assets rather than fungible tokens from person to person in a very frictionless way. I think that's an enormous starting point for, over time, moving all of the world's assets into the blockchain.
A lot of people are wondering the transition from proof of work to proof of stake for Ethereum, moving from miners to validators. So creators under the proof of stake system are called validators, whereas under the proof of work system, block creators are called miners because they would be rewarded for a block for mining and providing computational power. What are the advantages and or disadvantages of a validator over a miner?
Well, let's first come right back to Satoshi, who viewed the eventual system as losing its mining characteristics once all the Bitcoin were mined, right? So Satoshi himself never viewed mining as a long-term, stable solution to the situation. It's really more to kickstart the program. I understand that the time frames are long. We're talking about decades. But the the notion for proof of work was simply to inject ownership into Bitcoin and to try to decentralize that ownership. Satoshi himself envisions this eventual situation where all the Bitcoin are mined, and then the nodes essentially function only as validators or as aggregators of transactions, and expects that to be economically viable just on the fees that they charge. So even Bitcoin itself is not a pure proof of work system. It's a transient proof of work system.
Would validators not be subject to human error?
Well, I think no, I guess, is my shortest answer. Okay? Again, we imagined from the beginning that validators had a key role and that they could be rewarded for doing validation. And so the fact that there's so many disparate validators, and for us it was forming a consensus amongst validators that would advance the integrity of the system, I think it's certainly possible for any individual particular validator to choose to tamper with their own copy of the records and try to make a case for them being universal. But it's subject to the very same set of pushback incentives, namely the community knows it's a small-scale scam, if you will, as it is with proof of work. So no, I don't see any change there.
Okay. Going forward now, you've outlined the difficulties or challenges that Bitcoin has to overcome or has not overcome to be accepted as a universal medium of exchange. If you were to design a system of electronic cash based on the blockchain for the sole purpose of being a medium of exchange, which I guess was the original intent of Bitcoin, what would you need to do? In other words, what would you have to fix for Bitcoin? Or perhaps it's not fixable at all at this point. You would have to start from the ground up. What would this ideal blockchain-based medium of exchange look like and operate under?
Sure. So, I have a strong technology background. Sure. But what I've concluded is that it much more matters that we work back from a value-creating business case to find the technology solution that best meets it. And so, to me, the medium of exchanges of the future are simply ones that begin by solving particular use cases in particular verticals that allow for a more frictionless system that adds more value than ordinary money. One of the exercises we used to use when I was at Bell Communications Research was when someone was trying to create a new version of something, okay? Rather than try to create in as high fidelity as possible a digital version of the old system, we would ask, what does the old system wish it could be? In other words, when money goes to sleep at night, what does it dream of becoming? And so for us, this is always the question to rephrase. We need to imagine a future time where we look back and say, remember when all we had was money? Now we have whatever, money plus plus, okay? This thing that does even better what money was attempting to do. And so it's not about recreating with high fidelity what cash is like or currency is like. It's creating better mediums of exchange.
So there's different currencies for different use cases.
Well, again, how do we improve upon it? The smart contract itself is an enormously powerful idea. How do we make smart money? How do we make self-directed money? How do we make automated money? It's not about recreating what money does today, but doing it digitally. It's facilitating commerce throughout the world. And so there's so much room for growth to make commerce operate more efficiently.
Mm-hmm. You and your co-author, Stuart, what were your visions for this future of money that could operate more efficiently than today's system? What does money of the future look like, Scott?
Well, what's the old saying? If I knew what the jazz of the future was, I'd be playing it now. But what I do know, again, is that if I go into a situation, a group of an industry that's operating in a certain way to move assets, and ownership and value creation around. I know that the longer that I talk to them, the more we can begin to tease out things that money, even in its best and purest form, doesn't yet accomplish. And so you don't want to wear the money blinders. You want to talk about facilitating commerce.
Okay.
And so it doesn't just have to allow a unitary concept to exchange. You could be trading reputation. You could be trading levels of confidence. You can be.
Well, do you agree with the standard textbook definition of money that it has to facilitate three definitions or three roles? We've talked about the medium of exchange role. It has to also be a store of value and unit of account. Do you think Bitcoin satisfies all three, or do you think any cryptocurrency satisfies all three currently?
Again, I have great respect for economists, but in a sense, they are, as a group, they are looking about what has already occurred and trying to characterize it.
Right.
Okay? They're not out envisioning what could occur. Okay? And so I think in order of priority, medium of exchange is far more fundamental to this thing that we currently call money than the necessity of being a unit of account or a store of value. It's possible to imagine, look at it the other way. If you have a system that is only a store of value and never exchanged, then it is dead.
Right.
Okay? But if you have a medium of exchange, okay, even if it can't hold long-term value, as much of a deficit as that would be, life could still go on with just a medium of exchange.
We would live in a barter economy in that extreme example, would we not?
No, I don't believe so. Obviously, unit of account ties in as well. I'm not trying to just sort of sweep that under the rug. But the driver is medium of exchange.
Okay.
And again, I think there are dreams of money plus plus, not yet realized, that the right entrepreneur is going to find a way to more efficiently affect commerce in a given circle. And that's what we'll look back on and say, to think that we hobbled along all these millennia and all we had was money. Now that we've got this super money, or whatever we want to call it, that further enhances commerce, we wonder how we ever got by without it. That's the world that we need to picture.
The other great development, I want to talk about this and then I'll get to your work on AI and we'll close it off there. The other great development in money that's happening now is the advent of central bank digital currency, CBDCs. 19 out of the G20 countries are developing it. 9 countries have already launched it. 8 of them are in the Caribbean. So, central bank digital
Goodness
currencies.
for the Bahamas.
Thank goodness for the Bahamas. Lots of interesting things happening this week in the Bahamas. And I'm not just talking about CBDCs, Scott. So, do we need CBDCs is my basic question.
I think it's a step forward. Let me again suggest that you do have to separate the froth from what's going on underneath. And when you talk about 19 of the 20, so much of that is a circling the wagons kind of thing. Namely, is CBDCs going to be big? Well, we certainly don't want to be left behind, so we'll start an experimental project. More to the point, I think, and this again goes to money plus plus, this is fundamentally about information exchange and more information becoming public and transparent. Okay, and so I have a very contrarian view when it comes to the understanding about what the so-called privacy problem is. I think we need to be advocates of our data, certainly controlling our data, but to imagine that we want to prevent people from getting access to our data is in fact the absolute wrong way to view the privacy liberty debate.
Not to discredit what you're just saying, but as a foundational father of distributed ledger technology, one could argue that you've seen this happen from 10 miles away. I mean, everything is posted on the ledger, right?
Right.
I mean, it's not just central bank digital currencies. Any sort of cashless system based on the ledger could be transparent for all to see.
That's right. And I think what is lacking is the grasp that this can become the great enabler of individual liberty rather than something that restricts it.
I see.
Let me give you one example.
Okay.
We typically view the privacy problem as Google or Facebook knows so much more about us and we're powerless to sort of counter its effects.
Yeah, they do. Facebook knows what I want to buy before I want to buy it.
Right. And therefore that's an intrusion on our liberty.
Okay.
But I'll give you a different example that I think puts it on a clearer playing field for the future.
Okay.
So I'm guessing that just about everybody that listens to this is familiar with Airbnb.
Sure.
Airbnb system. And my wife and I first started using Airbnb. We liked it the first couple of times. Let's say the third or the fourth time we wanted to use Airbnb. We read the reviews of a particular place. We decided that was the perfect place for us to go on vacation. And so we put in our request for these nights at this place. And an hour later, we got a note from the purveyor saying, we reject your application. Why? Because you've only used Airbnb 3 times up until now. You don't have enough of a reputation for us to trust you. And so for the first time, I realized that this privacy issue is a two-way street.
Okay.
If we want to play in the marketplace as individuals, we have to disclose information about us. And I think if you look at the Airbnb as a kind of canonical case, you'll see that the real goal should be, how do I present the truth about me in as appropriate a way as possible so that I can gain more influence and more ability to interact with the rest of the world. We shouldn't always view it as a kind of bunker mentality that the more people know about me, the more vectors they have to spam me or get at me. That's fundamentally not the real problem. It's an asymmetry of information that's the problem. And so to me, what we're trying to do with blockchain and what is very much achievable is to drive that individual narrative that projecting more information about us can give us increased power and influence.
Right. Governments have claimed on their brochures, at least on the internet, that central bank digital currencies, being digital currencies based on the blockchain, will be more efficient. We talked about the problems of inefficiency of our system. They've cited improvements on efficiency as one of the main reasons of doing this. Improvements in facilitating cross-border payments and transactions in business is one of the main reasons of doing this. Do you agree with that first, and then we'll talk about the privacy issue?
Sure, it's a step forward, but it's going to have to compete in the marketplace to anticipate your privacy concern. The genie's out of the bottle. And just as when I was growing up, as a young student, one of the presents many parents would give aspiring students would be a little chemistry kit so they could perform all these little experiments at home with, making different reactions. The blockchain is like a money kit. Okay, I would call it Fed in a box. And the fact that there's an explosion of being able to explore what a currency is and how to use it to facilitate exchange means that the existing nation states, and again, I'm no anarchist. I'm happy to confess being libertarian, but the existing nation states and their own fiat currencies, pushed out as CBDCs, are going to have to compete on their merits with other alternative currencies. And so to anticipate that privacy question, if people don't like the mix of options that they have from a CBDC, they will be able, in essence, over time, to vote with their feet and choose to make use of a different currency mechanism that is more to their liking. The idea that the existing leading players of nation-state fiat currencies have a monopoly on the system, and simply by adopting blockchain-style solutions for their existing currencies means that that all of the non-nation state actors will be boxed out. That's just a myth. That's just a pipe dream. It's way too late in the game for it to go back to being a closed system.
Perhaps they're doing it for themselves too. Central banks have swap lines that they swap currencies with each other, and this might help them, with their commerce.
Absolutely will, but again, not within a closed system anymore.
There's a lot of, and I just want you to address this before we move on. There's a lot of fear of government's malicious intents with blockchain technology, such that you've addressed a privacy concern, but it extends beyond that. If, let's say, you have a low social credit score in China, for example, the governments can not only track or monitor your behavior, but they can alter your behavior by limiting access to capital if you have a low social score. And with the advent of CBDCs, that provides a direct avenue for them to do that.
I completely agree with what you've stated, and I'm sure that there are people that are listening to this discussion saying, how could somebody that was clever enough to invent the blockchain be so stupid about the fact that, like the digital yuan, allows people social influence, allows people's social standing to be used as a discriminator. And I think the answer for people that care is that you have to understand I was trained as a theoretical physicist. Okay. And what that means is I'm concerned about the ultimate long-term asymptotic state of things. I'm happy to acknowledge that there are near-term problems that present, but the power of the technology, sort of like from the Lord of the Rings, can't be undone, okay? And this means that these players are going to have less coercive power over time as there are alternatives to what they choose to use as their medium of exchange. There's no rule that says nation states always have to retain control of money or the world collapses, okay? And we're going to find that that's going to happen. The role of nation states is going to have to evolve, no differently than when they assumed a certain power with respect to a pre-printing press days.
I would just slightly push back on that, Scott, by saying that the rules are created by nation states, and they deem it necessary to control your money, they will.
They can certainly make an effort in that direction, okay? But in a sense, every Bitcoin transaction that occurs defies that notion prima facie. Okay? They are no longer the only game in town. Clearly, they are the currently viewed most powerful players, okay?
Which begs the question why they're not actively trying to ban Bitcoin in the West.
Well, I think the West has a tradition of not trying to kill the potential goose that potentially is laying golden eggs. They have enough respect for the fact that technology innovation tends to increase prosperity. Let me just give you one more example, and I apologize if it strays off, but it's a favorite of mine.
No, go ahead,
because I think it provides long-term historical perspective. In roughly the 1400s period, we first began to have accurate mechanical clocks, something that moved beyond water clocks that could, keep time only within tens of minutes a day or something. When we began to move to mechanical clocks, we suddenly had time accuracy, say, within a minute per day. Okay. There was a country that viewed this as a threat to its sovereignty and declared that the only people that could have clocks were government officials. What was their concern? Their concern was that now that there were mechanical clocks that could keep time, people could coordinate and synchronize efforts to overthrow the government. And yet there is not a single nation in the world that worries about people walking around with wristwatches anymore. And what is the reason that I draw that point? Something at the time that was legitimately viewed as a threat to the nation state, we've come to understand that technology evolves in what it's possible to do, but society also evolves with counterbalances that sort of neutralize the threat. And so in the same sense that no country worries about the potential of a conspiracy because people have wristwatches, the day can easily come where a nation state does not feel threatened by the fact that there is a variety of medium of exchange mechanisms out there.
I think the concern may be not so much a conspiracy to overthrow the government, but if we all were to use a decentralized protocol as a medium of exchange, the dollar would lose its hegemony as a global reserve currency, and hence the dollar would depreciate, and hence the U.S. would lose its status as a global power.
Okay, so obviously there's a lot on the table when you say that.
Yeah,
and,
okay.
you know,
I'm stretching the lines here a bit.
you know, I think it was Warren Buffett who said the best decision I made was to be born in the United States in the 20th century. Meaning, the United States, over the last 100 years, let's say, 150 years, has been such a global value creation machine, okay, that all you really had to do was, you know, hang on to the what do they call those things on subways?
Handrails?
Hang on to the handrail and just ride the train in order to prosper.
Okay.
And similarly, and let's just now speak to America as just an example.
Yeah.
Okay. All that really matters is for America to remain a highly viable economic growth engine, a value creation engine. I understand the benefits that accrue by having the position of being the world's reserve currency. But one thing follows from the other. And the whole idea of going on the defensive and trying to shore up and make sure nobody else becomes the world's reserve currency is completely misguided. Perhaps 20% of the effort should go there, but 80% of the effort should be directed towards making the economic engine even more vital. Okay? And then all of the benefits that accrue from that, such as serving as the world's reserve currency, follow in a natural way, rather than an attempt to defend a particular moment in time.
Final question on this, and I'll move to AI, we'll end it there. National security. Is this not a national security threat that the dollar is no longer the de facto global currency for trade? Currently, about 60% of global trade is the US dollar. If that diminishes...
Dollar denominated. I mean, that's really getting at unit of account.
Yes, yes.
Yes, and it's down from 80%,
Yeah.
you know, down to 60%. Of course, again, from a physicist long-term perspective, World War II was a kind of disruptive event in laying the groundwork for why that.
What I'm trying to get at is Bitcoin a national security threat for America long-term?
Only if nation states aren't able to realize how to take advantage of this multitude of currencies rather than viewing them as their sovereign right and their sole sovereign right to declare the medium of exchange, the unit of account, and the store of value. Again, I think there's so much that's envisionable for the future, and so long as nation states, that notion creates value, its existence is assured.
I appreciate your optimism in this time of gloom, so thank you for that, Scott. Finally, let's talk about your work in AI. We must not forget you are also influential in the artificial intelligence space. Tell us about your work and how that impacts money.
Oh, okay. Well, look, I certainly don't want to claim, any huge impact role in AI, but I was kind of at the right place at the right time in that mine was the first neural networks dissertation that came out of Stanford. And so it doesn't hurt to be wandering by the right place at the right time. And it's just created an enthusiasm for me to want to follow that through. So pragmatically, we're active investors in the AI space, just as much as we are in the blockchain space. And I guess if you're looking for something to sort of hang the comment on, let me say that this whole notion of crossing the singularity and humanity losing its distinctive role, I have about as much concern of that occurring as I have about nation states collapsing because they don't control.
Is that because you think it will never happen, or is that because you think it will happen after our lifetimes?
I'm saying it's because it will be irrelevant that it happens.
Oh.
Let me give you an example.
So it will happen, it's just not important.
Sure. It's not nearly as much of a threat as people perceive it to be, just like the government's worrying about wristwatches.
Yeah. Yeah, please proceed with your example.
There is a tendency to think of humans as unique because of their intelligence. Okay? But, and in a sense, that goes back to Descartes and his cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
But really what Descartes should have said was, he should have said, I choose, therefore I am. The fact that we are able to make choices, that's what defines being human. The fact that a machine can be stronger than my bicep or run faster than my legs, I view as no threat whatsoever to me being me. And in a similar vein, the fact that the machine can compute and think in some domains better than me is still no threat to me. It's simply an engine of my creation.
Would it not be a practical threat to you if, let's say, you were an athlete in this example, or you were a manual laborer, and they do build a robot that has stronger arms or stronger legs, and you are no longer obsolete? Sorry, you are no longer relevant, and you're made obsolete, and then they replace you with a robot, and then you're out of a job.
You know, there was a thing called the agricultural revolution that occurred a couple of centuries ago. You may not be familiar with it. Obviously, I'm spoofing you. Over 90% of the world
See where you're going with this.
was engaged in agricultural pursuits.
Sure.
At the time, someone just like you could have said, this is going to be a catastrophe, okay? Everyone is going to be out of work.
So I know where you're going there. Let me ask you this. So everybody back in the day, when they were farmers, they moved to the cities and they found new work. What's the next industrial revolution then?
It's that people's wants greatly exceed their needs. Okay? And so whatever surplus there is, people will find a need to want to have more of it. So job creation is built into the fact that people want more of something. My son the other day was arguing about this. One of my sons, who is trained as an economist, was arguing about this issue of there'll be nothing left to make. There'll be nothing left for people to do. And he had just joined a new employer, and they'd given him gift cards, okay, to sort of celebrate his having taken the job. And I asked him what he spent the gift cards on. I said, did you spend them on more potatoes? Did you spend them on more cloth for yourself to make clothes? Did you spend them on more leather to make shoes? And he sort of, again, as any son would, look at a father and says, are you nuts or what? No. What he bought was things that never existed 200 years ago.
Okay.
When there was this worry that everyone was going to be out of a job because we were automating agriculture. Right. Products get created because people are people, okay?
Yeah, well, okay. All right, I see where you're going. Final question, I'll let you go. Scott, this has been a fascinating discussion. What are the main problems that society faces today that AI can fix or should fix in the future?
That's a good question. And the answer really goes back to Adam Smith. You know, I was just reading those first 7 or 8 paragraphs in The Wealth of Nations, where he talks about the pin factory and the division of labor.
Right.
The pin factory, the division of labor, and the making of special purpose tools is all about the creation of additional value. And AI can gladly take over all of these roles that we are currently cognitively doing as if we were individual laborers. It can take over all of those roles, freeing us up to think about the next set of things that we as humans could do. So AI is going to be a huge boon across the board in terms of creating economic value. How we distribute it, well, that's kind of mankind's old problem.
Okay.
But I have some thoughts. But
Can you give us one application of AI that perhaps we haven't seen distributed en masse yet?
Well, we're about to see self-driving cars.
Okay.
Okay? That's a near and present opportunity. But we're not worried about Uber drivers getting out of a job. Okay? Now, maybe Uber drivers are.
Yeah.
But my message to them is find something else that you're capable of doing that people are interested in. finding new jobs is not the hard thing. It's getting out of the mold that an existing job needs to always stay the way it is. So, to come back to your point, self-driving cars, self-driving transportation, personalized transportation, the moving of mass transit down to a very individualized level and lowering its cost increases mobility for everybody. It's going to be a wonderful world.
All right, Scott, absolute honor to have you on the show. Thank you very much for coming on and spending time with us.
Thanks for listening to my babble.
Well, we are honored and informed by your babble. And thank you for watching Kitco News. I'm David Lynn. Stay tuned for more. Don't forget to subscribe.
Kitco News special coverage of the AIBC Summit is brought to you by Coin Payments. Crypto payments made easy.